when I see people chased off campus who can't speak because of their ideas, it concerns me. It doesn't matter if they're speaking from the left or the right or from some. These are the central places where ideas are to be exchanged. We have the opportunity to pray and to worship here in America that is special and unique, and I think bodes well for our republic for the next 200 and some odd years.
Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive.
We're so privileged in the U.S. to have an incredible system of government, allowing us to have cherished freedoms of speech and religion. And those rights are worth defending. And Jim, you recently visited with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo at the State Department in Washington, D.C. to discuss his faith and religious freedoms around the world.
John, Secretary Pompeo is a very gracious host, and I enjoyed our visit tremendously. He's an evangelical Christian, and I wanted to discuss the challenges of being a Christian leader with a lot of responsibility in a very secular environment. On the day we recorded our conversation, the Venezuelan crisis was in full throttle mode, so it was quite a privilege to have a few moments with the Secretary under the circumstances, and we greatly appreciated his time.
Well, Mr. Pompeo certainly has an impressive resume, to say the least. Before becoming Secretary of State, he served as the director of the CIA, and he was a U.S. congressman from Kansas. That was from 2010 to 2017. Prior to his government service, he was a businessman, and he's also a graduate of Harvard Law School and West Point Academy. And here now is Jim Daly with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Mr. Secretary, welcome to Focus on the Family.
It's great to be with you.
Let me start, for the listener's sake, let me start with your background, your faith. When did you say, okay, I think what Jesus said actually is true?
So I grew up in Southern California. I went to church. My parents took us to church, but it wasn't a central part of my life growing up. My sister she was in church groups and that kind of thing, and I was very focused on basketball in school.
That sounds like me.
But when I went off to school, when I got to the United States Military Academy, there were a couple cadets who were a couple years older than me. They hosted I now know it was a Bible study, but for me it was a gathering, and they served cookies, and it was a break from the respite of the day. And these two, they were young men at the time, truly led me to where I am today. They taught me Bible lessons that I'd known from my time growing up, but I revisited them and really turned me in the direction of my current commitment to Jesus Christ. Yeah. So I would have been 18 or 19 years old at the time.
You know, sometimes in the culture, many people don't understand that. They don't believe in God. They don't have that core conviction that there's something bigger than us. Is it difficult to maintain a faith in an environment where you're sometimes criticized for being a person of faith?
For those of us who have this as a central part of who they are and who spend time thinking about it and focused on it, we have our jobs. I have my duty to the Constitution. I work for President Trump, but I also know who I am, the things that impact me and the way that I try to live my life. I fall short, but you work hard at it. It's not difficult.
Yeah.
Folks will say things. Folks will make criticisms. But the commitment, my commitment, my understanding of this, I know it's so much bigger. I think it'd be hard to do a job like this without an understanding that you operate in this context where you understand that there are bad actors in the world, that there is evil in the world, but that we can work hard and we can try to deliver better outcomes for people. To know that you're doing this in a context in this incredibly unique nation that is the United States. It's a real blessing for me to get to serve in this way, and I don't struggle with understanding who I am and why it is I believe what I do.
I think that's so solid. Let me ask you, we met a few months ago, and you said something that really caught my attention. I asked you how difficult it is working as a Christian, kind of in Caesar's palace. I'm not talking about the president, but just in the sphere of government, because of things that you have to witness and do, especially as Secretary of State. You're seeing things that most of us will never understand are going on in the world, and former CIA director. So you've had some critical roles in government. But you said about your Christian convictions that the best way to show my faith is to be the best Secretary of State I could be. And that really caught my attention, because so often Christians, we want to wear our faith on our sleeve rather than do our best and let that be the example. elaborate on that.
I firmly believe that in everything that I've undertaken. I ran a small business. I was a tank platoon leader. I then had the privilege to run the Central Intelligence Agency, now the State Department's most senior official. In every one of those, people watch us. They watch how we behave. They watch our actions. Are they consistent with who we say we are? And this idea that by delivering excellence, by being true and speaking directly about who you are and what it is you're trying to accomplish and how it is that fits into the larger efforts that we're undertaking. I think if we do this, if we all do this with great excellence, then people of all religious faiths who have commitment to their faith can do the same, and we'll all come to a set of better understandings.
Well, and I think it's a great example on how young people, young people today, Christians, believers, should live their lives. I mean, in such a way with excellence that people respect them. And it's a great reminder, and your life has been that kind of reminder. Let's talk about religious liberty. You're managing that, so to speak, globally. You're looking at it. You've been very supportive of religious liberty globally. Why is it important that we protect religious liberty?
It's one of the most fundamental sacred human rights is the right to practice your faith in the way that you desire to practice that faith. Or if you choose not to have the right to do that as well. We don't need government forcing you to do that. It's different from that. It's fundamentally different. We know that many places in the world aren't like that today. And indeed, there's pockets in our own hemisphere where that freedom isn't available. So we've made a real focus. And so I speak about it in many countries to where I travel. We don't hesitate to call out nations who refuse to grant that religious freedom to their people. And then we've added a structural component to this, a very positive direction where we reward countries and we thank them for the good work as they make progress along their path towards extending religious freedoms. We held a ministerial. It was the first time the State Department had ever done this.
Describe what that is, a ministerial.
So we had foreign
know.
ministers. Yes, we had. It's a good point. We have foreign ministers, so people who are my counterparts. They're secretaries of state in these countries, and some of their team members came here. There were 60-plus countries in the summer of last year, and they gathered here in Washington, D.C. We had a number of meetings. We had religious figures from all across the religious spectrum. We had Jewish leaders and Muslim leaders and Christian leaders and Baha'i leaders. We had leaders from all across the religious spectrum. Yeah. And they gathered here to talk about the importance of ensuring the country that they came from granted all of their people the opportunity to worship in the way they wanted to. It was a wonderful meeting. It spawned lots of things, so we've had these in other countries now over this past few months. When it was here in Washington, other groups used that opportunity to get together. You saw interfaith meetings that were just absolutely extraordinary. Yeah. It advanced the American mission set, which is that we developed better relationships with these countries through this as well. And it was so wonderful. We're going to do it again this summer. It's going to be in the middle of July, and I hope the whole world will watch. I'm sure we'll have more countries here. We'll have an even broader spectrum of religious leaders, and we will continue to expand this central notion. And in our country, it's enshrined in our Constitution. It's in our First Amendment, this idea that you have the unambiguous right to practice your faith, and we'd like to see that extended more broadly around the world.
Well, let me say on behalf of the Focus listenership, thank you for doing these things, because it's refreshing to see government actually stand for things that we certainly believe in. And when you look at it, Mr. Secretary, pluralism, it's something I think the Christian community has embraced. I mean, I don't hear negative things about others choosing a different path in their life. I really don't. I think Christians get a bad rap for being negative or monsters. Yeah. It's unfortunate, because I think the Judeo-Christian values of this country have allowed people, even like the LGBT community, to rise up, to get a seat at the table, to have expression in a pluralistic culture. I think for us as Christians, it's about, let's compete in the arena of ideas. Let's talk about faith. Are we created in God's image? And I just so appreciate the fact that President Trump and you support those ideals.
No, I think your point's well taken. I watched the increase in anti-Semitic acts in Europe and even here in the United States. And it reminds you of this enormous need for religious freedom and for religious tolerance and for understanding. I'm a Christian. I'm an evangelical Christian. I believe what I do deeply. Others hold their views. We ought to be able to have good exchanges. And I think when that happens, everyone rises.
Yeah.
I think people who believe in their own faith rise. I think people who choose not to have a faith at this point in their life, I think they get more opportunities as well. This is a very Christian understanding, and it's a very deeply held American understanding as well.
Yeah, I agree. Mexico City, you've been very bold with supporting the expansion of the Mexico City policy. Describe what that is and why the administration feels boldly about the idea of life.
So the Mexico City policy began with President Reagan, where he first made clear that money that was taken from our taxpayers was not going to be used to fund or otherwise underwrite the taking of human life through abortion.
That seems so reasonable.
Yes, having said that, other presidents have chosen to undo that or to reduce it. President Trump came in, he immediately went back to where we were in the 1980s. But we've now taken a good look at the process, and we became very concerned that there were gaps, that there were subcontracting issues, and it gets pretty complicated pretty fast. But nonetheless, the principle that we were attempting to honor wasn't being fully fulfilled. So I've taken the lead here at the State Department to make sure that those gaps don't exist. So we expanded the policy to include lots of other elements with the simple goal of we want women's health. We want to spend all the dollars to make sure that women have the opportunity to maintain their good health.
Yeah.
But we don't want a single dollar going towards abortion or abortion-related services. And our efforts in that regard are something that we're very proud of.
Well, and I so appreciate that, because I think the statistic I have understood is that taxpayers provide like $1.3 million a day to Planned Parenthood. And for those of us that don't support abortion, I think it's just wrong that they should take our taxpayer money and end innocent human life with it. It's just, I know it's controversial, but that's the way we believe in the Christian community for the most part.
And in here at the State Department, ours relates to foreign assistance, what we're doing with foreign governments and non-governmental organizations inside of those countries. That's the budget that we maintain here. President Trump's made clear he doesn't want a single dollar going to abortion or abortion-related services, and our mission set, and what we made an announcement, it's probably been a month ago now, where we made that crystal clear and then took away some of the avenues where there was risk that was happening.
Well, again, we so appreciate it. Let's move to a more global perspective on persecution, back to your sweet spot. With Sri Lanka, the bombings there, and then, certainly the attacks on Muslims too. What's your overall sense, especially given your background as director of CIA? Humanity does horrible things to each other, don't we?
There is. I've said this, and some have mocked me for it. It's a tough, nasty world out there in places. Their evil exists. We know this from our book,
yes.
But we can see this from our daily lives as well. These are truly terrible acts, tragic acts, inhumane acts. People are blowing people up. In some of these bombings, parents have blown up their own children. It's just things that seem unfathomable, but yet it happens. Our mission is really twofold here at the State Department. First is to make sure that we protect America as best we can, so we develop systems and processes by which the risk that such an attack would take place here. From an external terror threat, we see the things that are already happening in some of our places of religious worship here. It's tragic, but to take down that risk. The second piece is to try and create the understandings which take away the ideological basis for this, that refute the central premise, the nihilistic premises that underlay some of this terror. And so we have a educational role as well, a diplomatic role there, to try and create conditions where these events are fewer and further between.
How do you go about with governments like China and other governments where persecution is on the rise seemingly toward the Christian church? How do those discussions go that you can share publicly?
Yeah.
I mean, to influence. It's unfortunate. I look at China and I think, what an opportunity for that country to become even greater if they were to embrace the church. Some 200-300 million who claim to be Christian in China. The power of that could be extremely positive for the culture in China, don't you think?
You've actually made the same case that I make when I travel and have the opportunity to speak with world leaders or my counterparts. we talk to them about this. We first make clear this is unacceptable from the American perspective. We don't pull any punches, whether they are friends or adversaries. When we see these denials of religious freedom, we call them out, whether it's what's taken place in Myanmar, what's taking place in Xinjiang in China, whether it's in a country in the Middle East. We are unambiguous in calling out abuses of religious freedom, the denial of religious freedom. The next thing is for us to do more than simply talk about it, but try to make a convincing case for why we see it the way we do and how we think they ought to change the way and rethink it. So one of the arguments that we make, and I think it's very powerful, is to the extent you are persecuting a particular religious group, your country is diminished. Its influence in the world is diminished. The willingness of companies to come invest in your country is diminished. Your capacity to have influence at the United Nations and in global conversations is diminished. These freedoms that America has so richly enjoyed and we have protected for a couple hundred years now have made America more special, more unique, and more powerful, and we urge them to move in that direction as well.
Turning to ISIS, I mean, that's been a battle for us. I remember, in fact, talking to President Bush, and he mentioned to me that it would probably take 50 years to defeat terrorism. I don't know if that timeline is still accurate, but what would you say to our listeners about where that battle is, radical Islam, and how to go about containing it, and what should we be praying for as Christians in that regard? Many Christians have been displaced. When I went to Iraq, I think there were 1.2 million Christians. I met many of them, the leadership there in Baghdad. Most of them are dead or gone now.
Yeah. So the risk to Christians throughout the Middle East remains great. There are fewer Christians there than in the times that we read about in the Bible.
And these are 2,000-year-old communities.
These communities have been some of the original communities in these countries, certainly in the areas you're talking about in northern Iraq. The threat from radical Islamic terrorism remains. I don't know about the timeline. It may take yet another 50 years. We're now probably 15, 20 years on from your conversation. It may take yet that long. There's good news. We have reduced their capacity to conduct global efforts, big, large-scale global efforts. But boy, it's pretty easy to build a bomb and put it in a rucksack and go to the marathon in Boston or enter a place of worship in Sri Lanka. The means by which to create this devastation and destruction is pretty readily available. So we have the intelligence, the national security task, and then this other issue, which is to call it out and call out those governments who are creating permissive spaces for that, to allow this to take place because they think it's an accommodation that won't create a problem for them. And the people of the United States should know that their State Department is hard at work at this. We're using all of our economic power, all of our diplomatic power to take down this risk.
Well, again, we so appreciate it. You made a visit to Israel. I've been a couple of times with Ray Vanderlaan, our wonderful teacher. He's done a series called That the World May Know. It's boot camp. As a former West Point cadet, you would appreciate it.
It's pretty special to go there with Ray.
We did, I think we hiked 115 miles in 14 days. But in that context, the way that things are illuminated for you when you go to that land, you went and met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. What is that like, representing government, but being a person of faith, rooted in Judaism, the Christian faith? How was that special for you?
So it's certainly special personally for me. On this last trip, I had a chance to also visit the Church of Holy Sepulchre. In addition to go to the Western Wall with the Prime Minister, I was the first senior U.S. government official to actually go to the Western Wall with the Prime Minister of Israel. It was historic and special, and so for me personally, it was really quite something I'll never forget. But I think it was also important for the world to see, and for citizens across the United States to see. A Jewish leader, a leader of the United States, traveling to honor their faith, their commitment, the unique and special nature that is this country of Israel. You've seen the actions that we have taken to support that nation. Boldly. Look, it's a democratic institution in the heart of the Middle East. There's enormous value to the United States in that, but it also has a rich religious tradition that is incredibly important as well to ensure that we preserve Christians are free to worship in Israel as well. It's one of the only places in the Middle East that they truly do have that opportunity. We hope that will continue to expand. The Pope's visit to the United Arab Emirates was really a special event as well. So I think progress is being made, but there remains an awful lot of work to do.
This may be an odd question, but I'm just, one, praying for you often, and I'm thinking of you and your role and all the decision trees you have. I mean, and sometimes faith doesn't inform us in every decision that way. I mean, I'm sure in core things it's critical that you're informed by your faith. And then there's so many people that are critical no matter what you do. How do you, I guess, how do you manage that decision making? Of course, under the president's leadership, but also, how do you handle just all the criticism?
So the first one's pretty straightforward. I try and bring every skill the Lord has given me to work every day. So I'm an engineer by training. I also had the privilege of going to law school. So I served as a soldier. So I've had a little bit of opportunity to understand about how America actually can deliver on its national security mission. And then I was in the private sector, and so I had a chance to truly connect with how commerce works and how economies can grow. So I try to bring all of those together every day to inform what I do. With respect to the criticism, I've been now in public life for almost 10 years. So a lot of people have been doing this longer, but for me, this seems like an awful long time. I have learned that so long as you've made your best effort, if you've truly built out your team, my team here at the State Department, and you've marshaled the facts and resources and the data, and you've made the best decision, or you've informed the president in the way you know best how to do, that there's going to be people be critical from all over the place. They're free to make their points. I listen to them when it is a argument that is made out of logic. If it's just name calling, it goes off my back.
Right.
But if there's a logical, I'm happy to take their ideas on board, and sometimes we get it wrong, and to learn from their critiques and to try and make a better decision next time.
That sounds extremely healthy.
It's pretty. It's actually pretty simple.
Pretty simple. Last question, and again, I so appreciate you taking time during a lot of activity right now with Venezuela and everything else that's happening. We deeply appreciate it. In the American context, we've seen challenges to religious freedom. We've talked about that a bit, but we've seen it specifically in the courts, the media bias, universities, where it's difficult for Christian students to even express themselves. What do you think the founding fathers were trying to establish to make sure that people did have religious liberty and that it could be maintained?
Yeah. So there's lots of famous history about this. Central to it was this idea of a republic, right? Benjamin Franklin says, I think it was him who said, I'm sure your listeners will correct me if I've got that wrong, but he talked about it's a republic if you can keep it.
Right.
And if you will continue to work hard at that, I'd urge every American, your listeners and all the others, to continue to work hard at this. We are imperfect actors. Our nation is imperfect. But what was unique is they built this structure, this system that created these freedoms, these fundamental foundational freedoms, religious freedom, the freedom of speech, that are so central to keeping this republic. If we will continue to honor that, and that's when I see people chased off campus who can't speak because of their ideas, it concerns me. It doesn't matter if they're speaking from the left or the right or
right.
from some. These are the central places where ideas are to be exchanged. We think about that when we travel in the world too. We want every country to have this opportunity to hear, to listen. We had the foreign minister from the Islamic Republic of Iran had access to our airwaves this weekend. He went on the Sunday talk shows, Foreign Minister Zarif, and got a chance to speak to the American people about what they're doing in Iran. I disagreed with almost everything that he said.
Right.
I would love the same chance to speak to the people in Iran, but I can't. And I think nations are diminished when they don't get a chance to hear these different ideas and evaluate them and judge them, to be informed by their faith or their decision process. Our founders were brilliant. They understood this. If you tried to contain, and if you tried to hold down, if you tried to create a resistance where an ideology would continue to reign, then you'd create a weaker nation. And instead, we're rambunctious. We argue. We debate. We have the opportunity to pray and to worship here in America. That is special and unique, and I think bodes well for our republic for the next 200 and some odd years.
Well, and again, thank you for everything that you're doing to preserve that right. Religious Liberty, the ministerial coming up this July. I'm sure that's a good way for our folks to pray for you and to pray for the efforts of the government. Other things we might be able to pray about.
Yeah. Oh, always. Pray for the nation. We have what's going on in Venezuela today. Pray for the Venezuelan people that there won't be violence and that they'll be successful at creating the democracy that they have demanded.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you, sir.
Jim, that was a great conversation with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about a variety of topics, including defending religious freedoms. And what a privilege for you to be there in the State Department for that conversation.
That's true, John, and it was in the midst of some very troubling circumstances occurring in Venezuela, as Secretary Pompeo mentioned. I appreciated his openness about his faith in Christ. I mean, he is not ashamed of what he believes and who he is, and we need to remember to pray for him, as well as remembering to pray for all of those in leadership over us. And I've got to admit, sometimes I don't do that. I get a little angry, a little like Peter in the garden, and I don't want to pray for some of these people that are, negative and cynical toward us as Christians. But it is a good reminder, and God commands us to pray for those in authority over us. I believe Secretary Pompeo is serving in his role for such a time as this, to use biblical verbiage. And perhaps the things he's doing with the ministerial to advance religious freedom can have a very positive impact on protecting or developing religious liberties around the globe for many years to come. That is important stuff.
Well, as a follow-up to this conversation, we'd like to encourage you to subscribe to The Daily Citizen, which is our free e-newsletter that provides a summary of the most engaging headlines. And we know that keeping up with everything can be so overwhelming. This is really a trusted guide to news items that affect you and that you'll want to know about. It's free, and we'll tell you how to subscribe when you give us a call or go to dailycitizen.focusonthefamily.com to find out more. And certainly thanks for your donations and your financial support of Focus on the Family. On behalf of Jim Daly and the entire team, I'm John Fuller, inviting you back next time as we once again help you and your family thrive in Christ.